I think I'm just going to give you a dramatic reading from my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. I'm going to read to you from the introduction to this book. As you can see on the cover, I put the Chinese high-speed rail, the fastest trains in the world. Thought that might be a fun thing to put on the cover of the book. It's called Getting Rich Without Capitalism, America's Way Out. All right, folks, I'm going to read to you. Almost all people have some desire to be rich. That's why so many people play the lottery. That's why reality TV shows portraying the lives of wealthy people are so popular. There's nothing wrong with aspiring to become wealthy. To be wealthy means a huge level of safety. Rich people don't have to worry about losing their jobs, their homes, or whether or not they can pay their bills. Rich people have time to pursue their own dreams and aspirations without being chained to a desk or an assembly line, toiling away, selling their time to a boss. In the world that we live in, wealth means power. Those who want to do good in the world and try to change things for the better often wish they had a huge pile of cash to pour into their noble efforts. Nobody wants to be poor. Poverty is a state of being defined by deprivation. Poor people are without quality living conditions. To be poor often means lacking access to basic services like healthcare and education. Around the world, to be poor often means to be malnourished, and even for those who are not malnourished, their access to food is below basic standards. The U.S. Department of Agriculture keeps track of food insecurity and says that at this point, even in the USA, supposedly the richest country in the world, 41.2 million people, including 6.5 million children, are food insecure. Many young Americans get deep into debt paying for their education, hoping that with that degree they can get a better job and be more financially stable. Many working class Americans diligently save their money or invest it in the stock market, hoping that they can have a shot at getting ahead and living a life of luxury and security. Things aren't going too well in America these days. If you walk through neighborhoods in Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Chicago, or other industrial cities in the U.S. heartland, you will see many empty, foreclosed homes. The next generation of Americans are dealing with the fact that they will not have the standard of living that their parents once had. The good-paying industrial jobs are gone, and even the retail jobs are starting to dry up as big-box stores close down. As the income of Americans drops, Walmart is being replaced by Dollar General. The decline of the American standard of living isn't just causing us to tighten our belts. Along with it come a whole new layer of societal problems. Young people stuck in low-wage jobs, living with their parents, are turning to drugs. Opioid deaths are rising to epidemic levels. The humiliation and shame, the stress and fear, the insecurity experienced by so many young Americans is most certainly playing a role in the rising number of mass shootings and suicides. To not be able to support oneself, to be deprived of the ability to have your own home, your own life, and start your own family is destroying the mental health of millions. Under such circumstances, it is no wonder that shows like Real Housewives of New Jersey or Rags to Riches are so popular. Plans for getting rich, or more accurately, finding a way out of poverty and decay, isn't just an afternoon fantasy or daydream. It's a matter of burning urgency. No one wants to have their life turned in to another statistic. No one wants to feel like they failed in life. While things are going badly for millions of Americans, some people are getting rich. Perhaps the best way to describe it is getting richer, because these folks were pretty well off to begin with. I'm talking about the payday lenders who take advantage of people living paycheck to paycheck and figure out ways to suck even more money out of those who are already struggling to get by. I'm talking about the pharmaceutical corporations that consciously push doctors to overprescribe opioids and get people hooked. I'm talking about the fat cats who own the steel companies and auto giants and close down their factories in the United States, shipping jobs to countries where they can get away with paying lower wages. I'm talking about the prison contractors who see crime and mass incarceration as a way to make bigger profits. I'm talking about the corporations and companies that lay off their hardworking employees who get paid minimum wage and replace them with criminals who have been convicted and work for pennies an hour inside the prison system. I'm talking about the corporations that get paid to make bombs, drones, tanks, and weapons of mass destruction. The CEOs who are sending sons and daughters from the American heartland to the Middle East as a great business opportunity. The problem with these people isn't that they are getting rich. These people were already rich, and right now they are getting rich by making the rest of the world poor. There's no reason for the people of America to get poorer. Oil and natural gas are the most valuable resources in the world, and we have plenty of them in America. Right now, we are producing more oil and natural gas than ever before. America is actually the top natural gas producer and third in oil. Despite the huge boom in natural resources and energy production, we are just getting poorer. The people getting rich from the oil, natural gas, and coal beneath our feet have names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Rothschild, and DuPont. The same clique of international bankers that are getting us into wars and signing us up for crooked, job-killing trade deals are getting rich from our natural resources. On election day, the candidates these billionaires put up, Republicans or Democrats, will talk to us about how they love God and country. But how patriotic can they be when they are grinding the working families of this country into greater poverty while they set up a global financial dictatorship? The only God these people worship is money. Cutting taxes, liberalizing the market isn't going to help you or me. The policies pushed by the two major parties are making these bloodsuckers even more rich, while making the rest of us even poorer than before. But imagine that things were different. Imagine the profits of America's booming oil and natural gas resources were going into the public treasury. The money could be used to build high-speed railways, connecting the heartland of America to the coasts. This money could be used to refurbish our university system. So once again, we were churning out the smartest engineers and scientists in the world, making huge profits from scientific breakthroughs like fusion energy and artificial intelligence. We could assemble the smartest technicians, architects, and visionaries to create a 5-year plan and completely remake the United States of America from top to bottom. With the money now being wasted on foreign wars, corporate bailouts, tax credits, and foreign aid to criminal regimes, we could dispatch a brain trust to directly, tightly organize the population in order to build a new America. Imagine every unemployed American between the age of 18 and 30 being hired into an army of American rebirth. This army of young people could be dispatched across the country in bright green uniforms to rebuild our crumbling water systems, refurnish our schools and hospitals, pave new highways, build new storm levees, and construct new efficient power plants, all while getting paid a decent wage in order to do it. Beyond this, imagine that the steel mills and auto factories were hiring once again, and it was guaranteed they wouldn't be moved overseas because these vital industries were owned by the American people and operated to serve public good. The wages of auto workers and steel workers would be carefully regulated by law, as would the price of steel and American-made cars. Imagine the banks giving subsidies and loans to young Americans to start their own companies, launch high-tech startups, and design their own innovative business models. Instead of banks ripping off working families with predatory loans or wrecking small businesses with crippling debt, money lending would be in the hands of the state. Under a state monopoly on finance, credit would be granted not so bankers can make money, but based on what the local community and the country as a whole needed. Interest from state loans would go into the public treasury, paying for more public services, scientific research, technology, and construction. In this new America, healthcare facilities, from drug manufacturers to hospitals to local pediatricians' offices, would be under public control. Healthcare would be guaranteed to everyone as a basic human right, and drug prices would be set by central planners in order to ensure that they were affordable. The life and health of the American people would no longer be left in the hands of those who seek to make a profit, but would be in the hands of the community. Educating the youth would become a national priority, not a place for student loan sharks and charter school grant hustlers to make money. Our children would stop being cogs in a decaying educational machine and instead become a national priority, with every American understanding that it was their patriotic duty to make sure the kids of tomorrow would have a better life than we are having today. In the context of this new America, in which society was being organized according to a rational plan, you and the people in your community would get rich quite easily. Your opportunities would soar. The chances of you and your family moving ahead in the world would be astronomical. The standard of living would increase, and the kind of innovation and creativity displayed by Americans in the past would resurface stronger than ever before. This vision of a United States in which the population is unleashed to become prosperous, the hope of working hard to become wealthy, no longer restricted into the hands of a privileged few, has a name. It's called socialism. That's not what you thought socialism was. You thought socialism was raising your taxes. You thought socialism was a guy in a fur hat seizing your house and your car. You shouldn't be alone in thinking that. You wouldn't be alone in thinking that. Socialism has certainly been slandered and smeared. The kind of drastic transformation and rebirth of the country that I just described as a potential socialist vision for the United States is exactly what socialism did in Russia, in China, in Cuba, in Korea, in Venezuela, Vietnam, and in so many other parts of the world. Before 1917, Russia was an agrarian country led by a feudal czar. But by 1936, it was producing more steel than any other country in the world. When Stalin put the peoples of the Soviet Union into motion with his 5-year plans, the world's largest hydroelectrical power plant, the Dnieper Dam, was constructed soon afterwards. In just a few short years, the Soviet Union became a booming center of production, churning out more steel, more tractors, and constructing modern housing at a faster rate than any other country in the world. At that time, the rest of the planet was having a Great Depression. Roosevelt sent members of his administration to Moscow to directly observe the process. The Soviet Union's great construction projects were an inspiration for the Works Progress Administration, in which the Hoover Dam, the Key West Highway, LaGuardia Airport, and so many beautiful landmarks were built in the United States. China had no steel mills in 1949. Today, it produces half of the steel in the world in a state-controlled, centrally planned steel industry managed by the China Steel and Iron Association. China now has the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, Huawei. China has lifted 800 million of its people out of poverty and is building high-speed railways, stadiums, hydroelectrical power plants, water treatment facilities, and huge amounts of other necessities and modernizations all over the planet. In Africa, in Latin America, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, the Chinese state-controlled machinery of production is humming along, laying the foundations, hoisting rails, and lighting up the night sky with electricity. And do you think this is making Chinese people poor? Are they being taxed into oblivion to pay for it? On the contrary, every day another Chinese person becomes a millionaire, and every week another Chinese billionaire is created. CNN even admits that Chinese people are getting wealthier every day. In the 1960s and 70s, China had many problems. All right, Sandinistas. While the Soviet Union helped them build industries during the first years of the People's Republic, their falling out with the USSR led to a clique of sinister poverty worshippers who kept the country poor. Led to the rise of a clique of sinister poverty worshippers who kept the country poor. But the ultra-leftist clique known as the Gang of Four was swept away. With the rise of Deng Xiaoping, the state-run economy swung into motion. Deng Xiaoping said words that every American should come to understand. Poverty is not socialism. To get rich is glorious. Yes, you've heard that communists and socialists want to abolish private property. However, serious Marxists and revolutionaries have always distinguished between personal property and private property. Your house, your car, anything you directly use is your personal property. Marxists have never opposed this. Private property referred to in Marxist texts is the massive centers of economic power, not used for personal happiness, but rather for the purpose of making profits. This private property, these means of production, clearly distinguished from personal property, should be forced to serve the public good and not allowed to function in ways that are detrimental to the community. You've heard that under communism, the government owns everything. Well, go to any country run by a communist party, be it Cuba, China, or Vietnam, and you will see all kinds of private hotels, hi to you, T-Mac, restaurants, tech firms, and online retailers. The Sandinistas of Nicaragua have enabled thousands of people to launch their co-ops and businesses. The Venezuelan government subsidizes and promotes all kinds of independent firms and stores. What makes this different from capitalism? They all function alongside a huge state-controlled manufacturing and infrastructure apparatus. The people have control of the natural resources, the major industries, and the lending of money. Profits are not in command, and human reason can dictate economic activity. The government puts forward a plan to raise the country out of poverty, and a tightly disciplined and organized population carries it out. However, within this state-controlled economy, in which human reason, not the irrationality of markets, dictates production, many people are enabled to become wealthy. Private hotels and tech firms, restaurants, farm cooperatives, clothing designers, and other endeavors are an essential wing of 21st century socialism. Not only does the government allow these things to exist, but it subsidizes and directs them. The socialist economy is like an orchestra. The big state-run industries, the government banks, the collective farms all play their role. The private sector and the independent entities play their role as well. However, at the end of the day, it is the 5-year plan of development set by representatives of the people that determines the country's overall direction and lays out the economic vision. This chorus of production and development is directed by human reason and political leaders, not profit-hungry, self-serving entities. Capitalism is a society based on profits. Only in capitalism can you have record profits for corporations like General Electric, Raytheon, Goldman Sachs, Chase Bank, and ExxonMobil, while the country falls into ruin. Socialism is when popular power and a government of strength forces the economy to work in the public interest, pushing aside those who would get in the way of a better life for the people. In capitalist countries, the rich and powerful corporations control the government and use it for their own ends. In the emerging socialist planned economies of the world, the private sector and those who work to make their own profits do so in cooperation with and in obedience to a popular revolutionary government. All right. In China and in the Islamic Republic of Iran, billionaires have actually received the death penalty in instances where they committed crimes against the public. No matter how wealthy the capitalists are, in a socialist planned economy, they are subservient to the state, a representative of the population that ensures their welfare and controls the major means of production. I'm sure this is not what you expected to read. You've probably encountered someone who calls themselves a socialist or a communist or a leftist or an anarchist or some other label and told you something completely different than I am telling you right now. You probably came across radical leftists who said that you are the problem, not the billionaires destroying the country. They did not want to empower you, but rather wanted you to feel guilty. They didn't want you to become wealthier, but they wanted you to be poorer. Not surprisingly, you had little interest in aligning with this person and their ideology. This is not what genuine socialist politics is. The middle-class cultural left, made up of counterculture elements, is a conscious distortion of leftist politics. In 1949, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency began a program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, intended to distort and control activism in the United States. The CIA funded Trotskyist magazines like Partisan Review. The CIA arranged for money to pour into the Institute for Policy Studies, which set up a network of carefully controlled activist groups. The Peace Corps, a supposedly humanitarian organization that cooperates with the CIA in gathering intelligence, was created and recruited idealistic young people to work in developing countries. At the same time, the CIA was paying and controlling leftists and working to crush what remained of the strong Communist Party of the 1930s. It was experimenting with drugs, mysticism, and the occult. The CIA was actively engaging in experiments with hallucinogenic drugs and mind control, and began distributing drugs on college campuses. The program was called MK Ultra, and it became a matter of public record in the 1970s. The result was the creation of a synthetic left, distorted political creature that had nothing to do with the long history of American workers fighting for justice. For example, at this time, most of the funding for the environmental movement can be traced back to big oil companies via entities like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Fund, etc. These forces don't want to discover or harness new alternative energy. They just want to help craft laws around oil and natural gas extraction so they can maintain a monopoly and put their competitors in developing countries around the world out of business. The entities now known as the left may have been anti-war activists a long time ago, but today, whenever there is a CIA-funded George Soros color revolution, they are the first to cheer for it and promote it. When CIA operatives are funding terrorists and inciting chaos in independent countries, these supposedly peace-loving and egalitarian people are even louder in supporting the destabilization than the right wing is. The so-called left work hard to promote and sell the war against Syria, and then they worked hard for the NATO intervention in Libya. Even the minority of ineffective leftists that don't openly cheer for CIA interventions are carefully controlled. The synthetic left has no future. A new entity, rooted in America's forgotten traditions of class struggle, must be forged in this key historical moment. Back when we had a strong communist party during the 1930s, it put out a very different message. It published books like Towards Soviet America, presenting a vision for a new USA under the control of a people's government. The Communist Party fed the unemployed and led them to fight for their conditions. It actually organized occupations of the National Mall by military veterans, This famous occupation in Washington, D.C., known as the Bonus March, was key in winning veterans' benefits. Membership of the Communist Party in the 1930s, they were not Soviet agents. They represented a tradition in American history. William Jennings Bryan, the great populist leader, famously said his vision for the country was every man a king, but none shall wear a crown. Huey Long, the governor and senator of Louisiana during the Great Depression, adopted this slogan as well. Eugene Debs traveled the country in a bright red train car in 1912 and received almost 1 million votes in the presidential election. His message was a call for an American brand of socialism, and millions rallied around him in the streets and at the ballot box. The U.S. Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist, Francis Bellamy. Bellamy was an anti-racist Baptist minister who refused to preach in front of segregated congregations. Bellamy was eventually banned from the pulpit in Boston for his revolutionary, thank you, Justin, anti-capitalist sermons, championing the rights of the American people against the Wall Street class. Francis Bellamy's relative, Edward Bellamy, wrote a science fiction novel, Looking Backward, that told of the future socialist USA. The book was a bestseller back in the 1880s. The Communist Party of the 1930s was always one of the loudest voices against racism, but this was not simply liberal pandering. The Communist Party said that black Americans constitute an oppressed nation within U.S. borders. The Communist Party supported black nationalism and saw organizations like the Nation of Islam as legitimate representatives of a colonized people within the borders of the United States. The times in which we can judge politicians by what they say are over. The time has come to know them by their fruits and look for what is actually being achieved. Every election year, the new candidates say they will fix health care, improve education, no child left behind, make America great again, hope and change. We've heard these cheap promises before. But why don't these positive changes ever occur? Because change does not come from hollow promises. The rebirth of the United States will only come from action. Our politicians right now are weak, cowardly campaigners, pandering to the very forces that have destroyed our standard of living. We need a government made up of people that are fearless. We need a government in Washington, D.C. that is aligned with a coalition of American working families who are ready to swing into action and push aside all who would stand in the way of a better tomorrow for our community, our country, and our kids. Imagine a politician that is not afraid to walk into Wall Street boardrooms with federal marshals and say, "You have done nothing for our country. You have been enriching yourselves while America falls into ruin. The game is up. You are done. This corporation is now public property. You have been nationalized. See me in a few months about a compensation check if you are lucky." That is a government of strength. That is a government of action, and a government backed up by people's power. This is the kind of strength that we saw with our two greatest presidents, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The reason that Abraham Lincoln was able to smash the Southern plantation system was because he had the weight of millions of people behind him. Marching behind Lincoln's banner was Harriet Tubman, the first woman to lead the U.S. soldiers into battle. Tubman led an army of freed slaves along the Combahee River in South Carolina, liberating plantations. Lincoln had the support of labor unions, and among his generals was August Willich, an open communist from Germany who corresponded with Karl Marx during the war. Roosevelt drew his strength from the industrial unions, the unemployed councils, the League Against War and Fascism, and other well-organized sections of the population who joined him in fighting for the people. Speaking to a mass rally in Madison Square Garden in 1936, Roosevelt proclaimed, "For 12 years, this nation was afflicted with hear-nothing, see nothing, do nothing government. The nation looked to the government, but the government looked away. We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace: business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, and war profiteering. They had begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. Never before in all history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hatred for me, and I welcome their hatred. The socialist system that has become so powerful in China is called socialism with Chinese characteristics. It is a planned economy rooted in China's unique culture, history, and conditions. The moment has come for those of us who love our families, our communities, our country, and our world to begin developing socialism with American characteristics. The American people will never accept the importation of a Russian, Chinese, Korean, Venezuelan, or Cuban political system. So the socialism that will eventually take power in the United States will be one rooted in our own way of life. It will be a socialism that encourages individual initiative and allows human beings to unleash their creative potential. It will be a socialism that respects civil liberties and permits freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. It will be a socialism that rejects racism, bigotry, and all forms of discrimination. It will be a socialism that respects the traditional family values, which many Americans hold dear. It will be a socialism that seeks to bring people up and enable them to bring themselves up, not one that celebrates tearing people down and destroying. The American socialism will be a socialism that promotes strength, not weakness, and seeks to maximize the potential of our population by combining our efforts for the good of the country and the world. If one studies American history, one concept that is very dear to our hearts is the concept of redemption. A very consistent theme in American history has been that of a great turnaround or a dramatic change of direction when it is absolutely needed. The most beloved American gospel song, Amazing Grace, was written by John Newton, a slave trader. Newton composed his still beloved religious anthem when he was determined to see that the practice of owning slaves and selling human beings violated human principles. Seeing that his life and his beliefs were wrong and leading him in an immoral direction, Newton turned his slave ship around in the middle of the Atlantic and returned to the USA, never again to be involved in chattel slavery. Americans still love this song, telling of how he once was lost but now am found. The tune was the primary hymn of a historic moment in America known as the Second Great Awakening. This moment of religious fervor left a huge impression on American society and culture. Mormonism, Seventh-day Adventism, tent revival meetings, and other religious practices in the USA can be traced back to this period. The Second Great Awakening was a key moment in establishing and strengthening the abolitionist movement, which culminated in the Second American Revolution and the crushing of the plantation system. Since the death of Roosevelt in 1945, the USA has been moving in a very dangerous direction. A huge propaganda campaign has worked to convince us that selfishness, greed, and a lack of solidarity and group identity are somehow part of who we are as Americans. Free market ideology has been so thoroughly inculcated among our population, and now our country is in a state of economic ruin. With infrastructure decaying, wages dropping, and our standard of living falling lower and lower, a thunderous political explosion is on the horizon. The The moment is ripe for a new great awakening among the American people. The future of this country belongs to the youth, a number of whom have already rejected capitalism in favor of populism and socialism. Figures like Bernie Sanders have become more popular than ever, and the Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011 marked a turning point in the consciousness of the population. However, these sentiments remain only words. Minds are changing, but the march toward a low-wage police state continues. A tightly organized and strategically operating political movement must begin operating not simply to foment chaos in the streets, but to push for the creation of a real government of action that can oversee the country's rebirth and create a new America. The time for Americans to interact with politics as observers is over. The future of the country belongs to you, and it is time for us to move forward. And that is the introduction to my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, an oldie but a goodie. That's how I opened the book. And actually, you know, that opening little manifesto is, I mean, it's pretty loose, but I get into all kinds of stuff in here. I talk about, you know, the oil markets. I talk about Steve Bannon and economic nationalism and how he's wrong. I talk about the history of American populism. It's good stuff. I mean, this is an oldie but a goodie. You know, I put it out probably just after Trump was elected, if I'm not mistaken. Trying to look for the date that I put this out, but it doesn't seem to be in the book. But yeah, this was fun, and this book continues to sell years later. I mean, this is a popular book, so check it out if you haven't. I think a lot of you really liked that stump speech opening. I mean, it's similar to a speech I gave in New York City called American Socialist Awakening. But this opening essay, this opening introduction is quite beloved by many people. So check it out. I'm probably going to cut it and make it a video on its own. But I thought that was how I would open the live today, as I would open by reciting the introduction to my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. I thought that would be fun. So there we go. That was a great way to open us up here.